Welcome back to African Voices. My name is Dr. Sibanda. I'm here with Chiwa Jihana and Mbali Pewa on the second segment of our show on South Africa and the recently held elections. On the other side, we talked about the effect that the ANC has won that election, but there's been a decline for the Democratic Alliance and some increase in the share of votes for the EFF. We talked a little bit about towards the end of the first segment about what the government should do to move things forward in terms of the economic shares for the different groups in society, in that society. And I guess that this may in fact explain the trend that we've seen in this election, which seems to be that the top political parties have shredded votes, while those at the bottom seem to have gained ground. But there's a lot of noise at the ground here. A lot of people are winning. You've got of the top 10 parties that have come into parliament, you've got about 1, 2, 3, about 8 of them having just 2 parliamentarians in parliament. And then you go up to the Freedom Front at 10 and IFP at 14. I'm trying to understand here. Is this decline at the top translating to, in your view, a meaningful voice at the bottom, or just a lot of noise? If it is translating to a lot of noise, is there any chance that this noise at the bottom will be organized? And what is the goal? Why have South Africans decided to have so many different groupings and voices in parliament, all these political parties in parliament?
So where I can start is that South Africa is a country with different identities. So identity politics also played a role in this election. So if we speak of the Freedom Front Plus, that party is the champion of it champions the interest of Afrikaners. So it's a far-right party. And if you look at, on the other end, we have the EFF and also the IFP, which are small organizations which have gained ground. So if you look at the Freedom Front, I think it's a significant rise for them, even though they just have 10 seats. I'm not sure if it will translate into something greater in the next election, but currently people are voting based on their identity, the culture, who I believe I am, who will work for me. So I don't know how that will shape up in the next election.
Mm-hmm. Look, Chiwa, you have, in that spirit, I think we should continue exploring that. But look, there's one thing here that's silent, that people aren't looking at. The Democratic Alliance is shredding votes, but it only lost about 5 seats, which...
What do you mean only? That's quite a lot in politics.
It is quite a lot.
Let me show you why I'm saying only. Yeah. The Democratic Alliance has a leaning towards identity politics. Mm-hmm. It's a race. There's some race to it.
It's born out of it.
Okay, it's born out of it. Mm-hmm. And so is the Freedom Front. Okay. And it seems to me as though...
Freedom Front Plus.
Yeah, Freedom Front Plus, yes.
That one.
I don't know what that plus is about. I think they're trying to say, make America great again. Mm-hmm. But anyway, they have lost seats, I think, to the Freedom Front.
To the Freedom Front, I see what you mean.
To the Freedom Front, yes.
Yeah.
And I think that the same way that the EFF is clawing voters away from the ANC, mm-hmm. Freedom Front is clawing votes from Democratic Alliance. So just as the mainstream politics isn't exciting enough of the people in the so-called Rainbow Nation, the white nation, part of this rainbow, is also not very excited about the Democratic Alliance. No. But there's a major difference here, which is that the rate at which the ANC is losing to everything that the ANC is losing isn't going to its main opposition.
No.
And the ANC's main opposition is the Economic Front. Sorry, is the EFF, yes.
DA.
No. DA is the white people's ruling party.
Okay, all right. So you're talking in terms of demographic.
In terms of the two, the dichotomy
appeal
of black
to
and
the
white
blacks,
politics. Yes. The main opposition, if the EFF gets any votes, it's trying to claw them from ANC.
Yeah.
But the Freedom Front isn't clawing votes from the ANC. It is clawing votes that were traditionally meant for the Democratic Alliance. And it seems as though the total vote for the white parties has increased if you add the 84 plus the 10 that the Freedom Front has. But the total share of the votes that are shared by ANC and the Freedom Front have decreased. Okay. Does it say then, and this is how I say it, that the alliance on the mainstream, the ANC alliances or the ANC side of things, isn't as organized as the DA side of things? Because the noise below the ANC is spread out and too much. The noise below the Democratic Alliance is more organized and succinct.
I think I see what you mean there, and I think it's some good insight. I was having a discussion with Mbali earlier on today, and it is a lot like that. I further went on to think of it in the context of global politics at the moment, the rise of the far right as well as the rise of the far left. The center political parties generally are losing support, primarily because of that problem of identifying, as Mbali has put it. People are leaning a lot towards identification. And unfortunately for me, political parties such as the Freedom Front Plus in South Africa is identifying with the premise. So the DA came into power as an opposition party to the ANC in the sense that it catered to the whites who campaigned on the premise that they were not like the apartheid government. Okay, so they reinvented themselves and they regrouped into what is the Democratic Alliance now. And now there's a token black man who is leading the party, Mmusi Maimane. Okay, and that's to lure a certain demographic, not necessarily because I think Mmusi Maimane was the best person for that political party, if I'm really honest. And what has happened is the people who are disgruntled with the rise of somebody like Mmusi Maimane and the presence of the black leaders within the DA are slowly gravitating towards the Freedom Front Plus, which is inherently an Afrikaner party, and campaigning primarily on the rights of white people and emancipation of white people, almost as if it's an antithesis to what the fight against apartheid was. That's where they're standing. So it's a polarized sort of argument, if I'm right, Mbali.
Yes, I agree with you. I think the DA is at a point where it needs to choose is it a non-racial party or is it a party for conservatives, for traditionalists? Because being what it is, having Mmusi Maimane as their face, and you're trying to satisfy all sides of South Africa, it's giving it serious problems, as seen in this election.
Now, I agree with you there, but here's the question: does it face any danger? Doesn't it have a voting bloc that's already set in stone? I mean, if it's going to lose, it's only going to lose to the Freedom Front. And that's not going to too much. I don't know if the Freedom Front is going to grow any further going forward. I think that the Freedom Front found itself very fortunate, partly because of what's happening globally. The rise of Donald Trump in America will have given it a lot of support and even a lot of technical support in terms of organizing for elections. I don't know how long that's going to last, but I think it might be that this is one of those situations where a party rises in one election and doesn't come back in the next election, like COP did a few years ago. But having said that, let's look a little bit at how endangered these bigger political parties at the top are in terms of losing votes. Do we see the small parties growing. Would the EFF grow beyond where it is now? Will it continue clawing more votes from the ANC? Clearly, it didn't get any votes from previously DA voters. All those seem to me to have gone to the Freedom Front Plus. So will it manage to continue doing that, given that most of ANC voters are in rural areas? So
what are we saying? In terms of statistics, it's 243 MPs for the ANC, is it not?
230.
230 MPs in total.
Yeah.
Whatever the breakdown is going on from the DA right down to the smallest, to the party with one MP, I don't think that even satisfies half of what the ANC
it's
have
170,
got. Yeah, of what Parliament looks like. So I think that also translates at local level, so a ward councillors, that sort of thing. Who's got the power at the grassroots where the highest demographics are? I think there's still, personally, this is a very personal opinion, I would have to really look into any research that's been done, but I feel like the ANC still, so is it every 5 years that the elections are held in South Africa? Yeah. I do think that the ANC, much as it was the party of liberation, it still holds a safety net for the majority of South Africans. So we're talking about 87% of South Africans being the black population. That's quite huge. It still holds that hope for a lot of people. The effect of that, to me, means, yes, numbers could dwindle. The other political parties will grow, but I don't know whether there's one that will grow in the next 5 years to that size, where you have 243 MPs, or 200. Why am I thinking 243? Am I really wrong? Is it 230?
It's 230, but it's okay.
230, okay. Yeah, I don't know. It's quite a huge number of MPs, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's a huge number. It's a huge ask for a single opposition party to overtake the ANC, but we should also consider coalition governments where the opposition could join together and overthrow the ANC, if I can put it like that. I believe that the ANC's power will reduce in the next elections. Poverty, corruption is all entrenched. It's not. It's systematic in South Africa. It's not something which changes over a year.
No.
Yes. So I do think that the ANC's majority, I don't think they will lose in the next elections, but it will
dwindle.
It will dwindle.
Yeah, I think so too. And just on what she has actually said, it's what will it's that power thing, isn't it, Nkululeko? We always talk about it here on this show. It's that clientelism, who's got the power and how they manipulate the resources so that it's like, without me you would not be surviving. And people have this loyalty that's quite skewed, because unfortunately the poverty becomes a weapon again. Poverty is weaponized against the people, you know, like your loyalty for my food.
Yeah.
And it's not your food, it's actually the state's food.
Look, you bring in an important aspect of this, and that I think we should talk into, the idea of both the poverty being used against the people by the ANC, because it's a ruling party. But let's talk a little bit about the idea of a potential coalition. As I said earlier on, it seems to me as though there's a lot of noise just below the ANC, very limited noise below the Democratic Alliance, between mainstream South Africa and elitist South Africa. Now, what are the chances that by the time we get to the next election, some of these political parties at the bottom would coalesce? I think that they would gain more power and influence by simply coalescing. You're talking about 180 votes, sort of 170 votes, and if you put those together as you go towards an election, I think that, and it's about 40% of those who voted, you're going to have a lot of power there. And Julius Malema just said the other week that he thinks the ANC was served by a slightly reduced voter turnout. So if you were able to build a much larger coalition, my thinking is that as it has done elsewhere in the world, you may end up with a higher turnout. And if there's a higher turnout, the ANC may lose ground. So is there any chance at all that these other political parties, for excluding perhaps the Freedom Front, which is anathemic to the other political parties that are identity politics but not necessarily race. Race is much more divisive than...
I'm shaking my head.
Yes.
I'm shaking my head because I think coalitions work on commonality.
Yes.
Already we have Andilem yes, he was part of the, what do you call it?
EFF.
The EFF. Already there's that breakaway, and he's not doing badly himself. Fundamentally, a party like the DA and the EFF, I mean, it was weird. They once agreed in Parliament on some...
and in some municipalities as well, they do form a coalition, which is usually unsuccessful because, as you said, it's based on commonality.
It's based on commonality. And so usually, I think what we've seen in most African... Well, you guys had it, I think, in Zimbabwe. It worked for a little bit, didn't it? The coalition government between ZANU-PF and MDC when Morgan Tsvangirai was alive. That was one where I think I saw it work for a bit. But generally, I have not seen coalitions actually go beyond an election.
No, but they've pretty much worked miracles if they are coalitions for power rather than coalitions in power. Coalitions in power don't work.
But it's
over a very long time. But coalitions, in order to take power from a dominant political party, they work. They call them rainbow coalitions. They tried this in Kenya. It didn't quite work for them. But I think that because the ruling party in Kenya kind of recast itself in a different way. But I think that if the political parties at the bottom agree on an electoral pact, that we go into the election as one political party, and you've had, when they were dealing with Zuma's corruption issues, the DA and the EFF worked
some consensus
together. They'll find consensus against the ruling party. I mean, I'm not saying that the ruling party shouldn't continue ruling. I think I speak to this because I see a trend in Africa where the older ruling party political entities that participated in the liberation struggle have tended to continue to want to maintain power at all costs. And I think that there is a new wind and a new generation that seems to need that change in order to recast Africa in a different form. And I'm thinking, I don't think that the DA represents for example, a new cast Africa represents is part of the world. But I'm wondering whether these other political parties have a young taste to them and could be willing to recast Africa in a different way, away from corruption, away from heavy misuse of the military and the police. Of course, you don't see this in South Africa. I don't think you abuse the military and the police. But the South African government has consistently supported, the ANC government consistently supported governments in Africa, Southern Africa, that do abuse military power, that do abuse constitutionalism.
Now it just slipped my mind. So with, I think we're speaking about coalitions with I talk about the younger people in the party from different parties becoming one.
From the smaller parties.
From the like the rise of the youth.
I think people have got different political parties have different ideologies.
Do you think Malema's edge, for example, is important in the way he loses or gains elections?
Do I think what?
Malema's edge is important plays a role in the way
being
he loses.
A youth. He's considered a youth still, is he? He's been a youth forever, hasn't he?
I think it ends at 35.
It depends where you are.
How old is he?
It ends at 35.
In Zambia, I know it's 35,
in my country, it's 50-something, but it's okay.
So there's currently a challenge with the youth in South Africa, as the majority of them did not vote in these elections, and it's not so-called apathy, it's just because they feel nobody's really representing them in in politics. So I think Malema is making a stand, but I wouldn't say he's targeting or the youth see him as the person to, or as the party to assist them in gaining a livelihood, if I can put it like that.
Yeah, although I have seen that some of the media houses are actually positioning that the people who actually were influential in this election were the youth of the two main political parties, though, so the youth wings. I haven't looked much into that, but I think Reuters had that as a headline about how the youth actually changed the face of this election. So in the way of leading up to the elections themselves, they may not have voted, but I think they were the foot soldiers, kind of like what I think we see in Zambian politics. A lot of young people, especially the unemployed young people, which is quite a high statistic in Zambia, you find they're the ones that are running around and making the noises for the political parties. I've got a feeling that that's what that would look like. I haven't read the articles yet. But then when I think about it, the DA does have some young people. There was a young lady that was recently elected as an MP. She was quite young, and I think she's speaking up quite a bit, isn't she?
Yes, I think all the parties are moving towards, letting go of the old faces, bringing in new young people. I mean, the EFF, the IFP, Inkatha Freedom Party has also brought in some young blood. If that will translate to more votes in the next elections, it's still to be seen.
That's important, because my next follow-up question there was going to talk about the impact that the South African election and its outcome, in which a former freedom-fighting party, dominant party, seems to be losing ground. Does that have any impact on, or does that somehow project a particular picture on the trajectory that African politics is taking? You have a lot of these young politicians on the African continent. In Zimbabwe, you've Chamisa, you've got in Rwanda, you've got somebody, I think, coming up to follow Odinga in Kenya. As a young man there who tells me he's interested in taking over.
The artist in Uganda who gets locked up every week,
yes,
Bobby Wine.
Bobby Wine. You've got the former student leader in Nigeria, and so on. So are we seeing a trend here where some of these young people are beginning to define Africa or give Africa a new hope? Are we beginning to see a post colonial politics era where the whole narrative will not just be about colonization?
Freedom fighters.
Are we getting into a progressive era?
I think there's a hunger for that. There's definitely a hunger for that. Whereas before, the hunger may have been there for that change, but it was the boldness to step out of the umbrella of the freedom fighters and say, look, we can take this from here. Right now, there are people who are rising that are not part of that generation and saying, we need to take over from here. I think that's exactly what is happening in Sudan. If anything, we're saying, we're going to take over. We've got this. We've got this. But then they keep being met with the challenges from the reigning powers who have got the machinery to stop you and discourage you.
I think liberation movements have a challenge. Is that once you've liberated the people, how do you then diversify? How do you change yourself to remain relevant? To consistently remain in power. So I think that the ANC has done its job. The old people come and they should go now. Yes, let the younger people direct the narrative, and then change may come.
Well, that's all the time we have for African Voices on Shepherd Live today. Thanks to our guest, Mbali, and to our co-ranker here, Chiwe. We'll see you next week, and stay tuned in. Thank you.